Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The big story tonight comes from West Asia, perhaps among the biggest stories of our times. Israel and Saudi Arabia are said to have agreed to a deal. They're working on a deal. This will mark a huge shift in the region. One is a Jewish state, the other the de facto leader of the Muslim world. Their coming together and normalizing relations would be very, very significant. So what exactly are the terms of the so-called deal? Where does it leave Palestine? And what does it mean for the politics and power equations in the region? We'll bring you the very latest. Meanwhile, China is reporting deflation, meaning negative inflation. Prices are falling and it's bad news, both for Beijing and the rest of the world. We'll explain. In Taiwan, 3 former service chiefs of India are on a visit. Is this a signal of intent from New Delhi? What is the message for Beijing? In South Korea, after a week of utter chaos, the government wants to save face by getting BTS to perform in a concert. In Indonesia, a scandal at the Miss Universe pageant has put the spotlight on why beauty pageants have no place in today's world. All of this and more coming up. The headlines first. Israel sends a stern message to Lebanon, says a war with Hezbollah will take Beirut, quote-unquote, back to the Stone Age. The Israeli defense minister says they don't want war. It comes after repeated skirmishes at the border with the Iran-backed group. Kenya's government and the opposition launch fresh talks, but will it end the bitter political feud? At least 20 people have been killed in the protests over the high cost of living. Kenya is one of East Africa's most stable democracies. The unrest has sparked global concern. Mind your language when in Iraq, Baghdad bans all media from using the term homosexuality, saying they must use sexual deviance instead. The word gender is also banned. All phone and internet companies are barred from using these words. Australia's national broadcaster exits Elon Musk's X, previously known as Twitter. ABC shuts down almost all accounts, citing toxic interactions and costs as major factor. ABC is the third big public service broadcaster to remove itself from X. NPR and PBS exited Twitter in April. And are you ready to play golf in Pyongyang? North Korea invites foreign golfers to a tournament but makes no mention of the date. North Korea sealed its borders in 2020 due to the pandemic. Travel to the country has been almost non-existent since then. The big story tonight is a really big story. A few years back, it would have been impossible. But now the impossible is happening. Saudi Arabia and Israel will normalize ties. This is a truce that has been many years in the making. It's being brokered by the US. We've been tracking the meetings and the statements. The signs were very much there. It was more a matter of when. The reports came a few hours back. There's talk of a deal and broad points of convergence. A final agreement is yet to be hammered out, but we are told it is finally happening. Washington and Riyadh have reached an understanding. They have agreed on the key points, the key pillars as they're calling it. Reports say both sides have made big concessions. And this is extremely significant. To understand why, one must first understand their history. Saudi Arabia is an Arab kingdom, the de facto leader of the Muslim world, home to the holiest sites in Islam. Israel is a Jewish state. For the longest time, denied existence by the Muslim world and engaged in multiple wars with its neighbors. So Saudi Arabia and Israel were sworn enemies. The biggest point of contention was Palestine. It's a very complex story, but on a very, very basic level, it's also a fight for land. Palestinians see Israelis as occupiers. Saudi Arabia backs the Palestinian cause. Its troops have fought 2 wars against Israel. But at some point, the sand shifted. Iran became a bigger enemy. The Saudis are a Sunni Muslim kingdom. Iran has Shia majority. They were at loggerheads. Iran and Israel are also enemies. And what's the enemy of your enemy? A potential friend. So Israel and Saudi Arabia began a secret relationship. Now they're making it public, and the matchmaker is America. Under Donald Trump, the US got multiple Arab countries to normalize ties with Israel, and it happened with Saudi Arabia's blessing. They signed what's called the Abraham Accords. In recent months, Washington made another push. There was a series of discussions with Riyadh. The Saudis made some demands. The Americans most likely agreed, which is why they have what they're calling the broad contours of a deal. What are these key pillars? Number one is Palestine. Saudi Arabia wants some concessions from Israel on Palestine. Number two, nuclear reactors. Saudi Arabia wants a civilian nuclear program. The US, we are told, is on board. Number three, security guarantees. The Saudis want protection from the US. They want America to remain invested in the region, and Washington is apparently willing to discuss it. So those are the key pillars, and this was the first step. Now the process moves to the next stage, which is negotiations. There will be hectic diplomacy, the fine print will be discussed, the specifics will be hammered out. What kind of security guarantees does Riyadh need? What kind of protections will the US provide? And most importantly, what kind of concessions will Israel give to the Palestinians? All of those questions will be answered over the next year. Yes. Reports say the negotiations could take anywhere between 9 to 12 months. Let's now also talk about the concessions that Riyadh is making. The US wants a commitment from the Saudis, a limit on their growing relationship with China. Reports say Washington has asked Riyadh to agree to such limits, to quote-unquote distance itself from Beijing economically and militarily. That's the message from the US to Saudi Arabia. Will they agree, though? And to what extent? Again, it all boils down to the negotiations, but America has shown its hand. It wants to contain China in the region. It has a wish list for the Saudis. No Chinese bases in Saudi Arabia, limits on the use of Chinese technology like Huawei, and no yuan for oil purchases. The US could ask Saudi Arabia to price oil exclusively in the US dollar. And those are some sweeping demands, but that's the price that America could impose on the kingdom. We're given to understand that the Crown Prince is in no hurry to push this through. Reports say Mohammed bin Salman spoke to his advisors and he has told them that there is no rush. The kingdom wants to see what Israel brings to the table, especially on the issue of Palestine. And that's the big hurdle for this deal, the trickiest part. Israel and its hardline government. Apparently, Riyadh wants to see a gesture from Tel Aviv, something that leads to a future Palestinian state. If not a commitment, at least a good faith gesture, something to secure Palestinian interests. And that's a big ask. Will Prime Minister Netanyahu agree? Is he in a position to agree? Reports say he will not make any significant concessions, but he is willing to offer a modest compromise. He doesn't really have a lot of elbow room here. Netanyahu is tied by the demands and politics of his coalition partners. They won't give him a free hand, and their politics does not allow any concessions for Palestine. So the road ahead is going to be very tough. And yet, the broad deal is a big step, a starting point on the road to normalization. This could change, like I said, the politics and the power equations of West Asia. It would mark the return of America in the game. Each side knows what it wants. The challenge now is to find middle ground. Now, China's economy is making headlines every day. Yesterday, we told you about the falling exports. Today, there is more bad news from China. The Chinese economy has slipped into deflation. What does that mean? Prices of consumer goods have fallen. Everything is getting cheaper. It may sound like good news, but it's not. Deflation is the opposite of inflation, and it translates into no economic growth. In other words, China's economy has tanked. The world is talking about it. But the people of China are not. They're wary. Officials are resorting to self-censorship. They're refusing meetings and watching their backs. They're afraid of inviting Xi Jinping's wrath. We'll tell you all about it, but first the numbers. Consumer prices have fallen in China. It's the first such fall in 3 years. Last month's consumer price index is out. It fell by 0.3% year on year, meaning it's 0.3% lesser than this time last year. In the month of June, there was no change. Prices did not move. In the month of July, we have seen a fall. Now, what is the consumer price index? It is a measure of inflation. It tells us how consumer goods are priced. And what kind of goods are these? The kind that we buy or use every day, stuff like food, clothing, transportation. Their prices are falling in China, and that's bad news for the Chinese economy. When an economy deflates, everyone suffers the consequences. Prices fall because people are buying less. And you know what happens when demand falls? It impacts production. Factories make fewer goods. This has a trickle-down effect on jobs. Low demand and low business leads to layoffs. Over a longer period of time, it hits investments and businesses. It leads to losses. And the Chinese economy is going down that road. What about the rest of the world? They won't be immune to what happens in China. Beijing's economic decline will affect everyone because China is a major economy. It is a major importer too. It's the world's largest marketplace for energy, for raw materials, and for food. Deflation in China will mean a drop in all these orders. The Chinese will import less, so countries that depend on China for business will feel the impact. They'll have to look for other buyers. And here's something else you should know. This did not happen out of the blue. China's deflation has been in the making for a while now. At the beginning of this year, they set a target. China wanted to keep inflation at 3%. But it has failed. Inflation has fallen into negative territory. The government tried giving some stimulus. They also slashed interest rates. They offered tax incentives to businesses. But there was no major relief package. Experts have repeatedly called for such a package, but Beijing has refused to go down that path, and that's problematic because China's economy is seriously sick. It is like a patient who needs surgery, but Beijing is only offering it Band-Aid. It won't work. So the question is, why are Chinese officials hesitating? It's hard to say because they're not talking. They seem to have gone incommunicado. Investors, bankers, business owners, economists, they've all tried to reach these officials. And these are people who regularly visit China. They hold frequent interactions with technocrats. But in recent weeks, they haven't been able to get in touch. Reports say invitations for coffee or dinner are being declined. If they do get a chance to meet, there is no frank exchange of opinions. Officials stick to templated talking points. Again, the question is why? And the answer is this. Chinese officials are under scrutiny. There is now a new anti-espionage law in China. It came into force in the month of June. Its provisions are vague by design, and the punishment is harsh, like life imprisonment, even execution in extreme cases. And this new law has sent Chinese technocrats into a shell. They won't speak. Beijing is going to great lengths to protect information. This year, China also rolled out an app. It is used to train government workers on how to keep a secret. All officials have to take this training. They have to spend 4 hours on the app. They also have assignments, essays, tests. There was a time when China's technocrats were celebrated. China had a reputation of running a professional bureaucracy, but today they're being treated like school kids. They're being made to take tests. And all of this has consequences, and they're showing. Foreign direct investment has fallen to a 25-year low. Foreign funds are not investing in Chinese stocks. The market is too unpredictable. China has lost growth momentum. More importantly, China has lost the trust of the world. They say rank never retires. It remains with you long after you hang up the uniform. Seems to be the thinking in Taiwan as well. 3 of India's retired defense chiefs are in Taipei. Former Army Chief General Manoj Naravne, former Navy Chief Admiral Karambir Singh, and former Air Force Chief Air Chief Marshal RKS Bhaduria. What are they doing in Taiwan? All 3 of them are attending the Catering Forum. It is an annual event on Indo-Pacific security. It is organized by Taiwan's government, so Taipei invited and they agreed. On paper, this is all unofficial. This delegation does not represent the Indian government. But unofficially, the message is quite clear. India is stepping up engagement with Taiwan. Not just cultural or economic engagement, but also strategic engagement. The 3 retired officers are expected to hold talks with Taiwanese leaders. They will also offer India's views on the Indo-Pacific. Again, unofficial views. So what is India's strategy here? Well, we do not have official relations with Taiwan. We follow the One China policy officially, meaning India only recognizes the regime in Beijing. But under Prime Minister Modi, the relationship has changed. In 2014, he invited Taiwan's representative for his swearing-in ceremony. It was considered a bold move. But in 2019, for his second term, there was no such invite. This was before the clashes in Galwan. India was still hoping to salvage its relationship with China. But after 2020, the change is more prominent. Taiwan's Deputy Trade Minister visited India in 2022. They're also planning to set up a cultural exchange center in Mumbai. 2 of them already exist in Chennai and New Delhi. Why is India doing this? Just a dozen countries in the world recognize Taiwan, so why is New Delhi pursuing closer ties with a de facto pariah? For 3 major reasons. One is the China factor, of course. Taiwan is an easy way to needle China. It can reduce Beijing's focus on Ladakh and the border with India, sort of like a 2-front distraction. The second is investments. Taiwan is a world leader in semiconductors or chips. They make up around 60% of all chips and around 90% of the most advanced ones. So India needs Taiwan's help to become a chip hub. It's easier said than done though. Taiwan's Foxconn was supposed to build a chip plant in India. The project was worth $19 billion. But last month they pulled out. Was it a setback? Yes, it was. But despite that, both sides need each other. Taiwan, for example, needs to diversify. In 2010, around 80% of their foreign investment went to China. It was far from ideal. Your biggest threat cannot be your top investment destination. So now Taiwan is looking for options. Last year, China made up just 33% of Taiwan's investments. India will be looking to capitalize on this shift. Taiwanese experts say investments to India could increase 8 times in 5 years. And finally, reason number 3, strategic imperatives. A war in Taiwan won't be limited to that region. The whole world will feel the shock. So all countries, including India, have a stake. I'm not saying we'll be dragged into the war, but India will have some big decisions to take. For example, if the West asks India for refueling bases or for military supplies, what are we going to do? What if China mounts a 2-front offensive to keep New Delhi engaged? How do we counter the chip shortage? All these questions will have to be answered. The defense forces are already on the job. Reports say India's Chief of Defense Staff has asked all 3 services for options. Basically, what should India do if war breaks out? That's where unofficial diplomacy is so important. You can exchange ideas, you can compare plans. You can also get information about your enemy's weaknesses. And no one knows the PLA better than Taiwan. Their strategies, their strengths, their weaknesses. Taipei can share all of that with New Delhi. Unlike in Ukraine, this war, if it happens, whenever it happens, will have direct consequences for India. So information and cooperation is key. You can't just bet on common sense prevailing. It's not exactly China's strong suit. Just last week, they released a new documentary on a possible invasion on Taiwan, a possible invasion. The documentary is called Chasing Dreams. It has 8 episodes in total, very detailed ones too. They feature interviews with multiple Chinese soldiers. All of them said the same thing. They would give up their lives to capture Taiwan. Simply put, it's a suicide mission. So we can never rule out the possibility of a Chinese attack. We've seen how bad their economy is. Who knows, maybe Xi Jinping will want a distraction. So India needs to be prepared for all scenarios, including the worst case scenarios. I know it's impossible to shift away from the one China policy, but diluting it is very much possible, and that's something India is certainly looking at. Every group has fixed roles. You have the funny one, the shy one, the serious one, and then you have the one who spoils all plans. The spoil sport in the group of 20 or G20 is China. Reports say Beijing has a problem with India's motto for the G20, this one, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It is a Sanskrit phrase derived from the Upanishads. It means the world is one family. Now you would think it's a non-controversial one. Why wouldn't someone like this? Why wouldn't you like the world to be one family? Well, China doesn't. Reports say they have objected to including it in all outcome documents, like the one released after the finance ministers meet or after the energy ministers meeting or the tourism ministers meeting, all of them. These documents do not mention Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. They only mention an English version of it. One earth, one family, one future. There is one exception though. The foreign ministers' meeting document does mention the Sanskrit phrase, and who knows, maybe that's why Chingang lost his job. But jokes aside, what is China's objection? Beijing says Sanskrit is not an official language of the United Nations. The UN has 6 official languages: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Spanish, and Russian. No Indian language is part of it. So China says you can't put Sanskrit on official texts. Letterheads are fine, the G20 website is fine, but on meeting documents, a strict no. What about the other members? Do they also have an objection? Reports say most of them sided with India, and why not? This is argument for argument's sake. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is among the oldest philosophies in India. The world needs a dose of it right now. We are fighting wars with other countries, with nature, even with ourselves. So the idea that Earth should be one family is positive. Instead of encouraging it, China is shooting it down. Not surprising though. China has repeatedly tried to derail India's G20 presidency. In the month of May this year, a G20 meeting was held in Jammu and Kashmir. China skipped it. Before that, in the month of March, there was a meeting in Arunachal Pradesh. Again, China skipped it. What reasons did they give? On Kashmir, they said the territory is disputed. As for Arunachal, they claim the state as their own. But this time, the Chinese have outdone themselves. They have objected over language. It's as petty as it gets. So what exactly are they playing at? We can think of 2 possibilities. Number 1, an attempt to tarnish India's image. This is India's first ever time presiding over the G20. New Delhi has been promoting it a lot. Plus, this year has been diplomatically very important for India. Some big visits to the US and France, some crucial balancing acts between Russia and the West, and also the presidency of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India was the president this year. The G20 is supposed to be the crowning moment, the culmination of everything India has achieved this year. So a successful summit is key for New Delhi. India's image as a bridging power is at stake, and China knows this. If the leaders are unable to agree on a joint statement, it's an embarrassment for India. Possibility number 2, a tit-for-tat move. India has been quietly resisting China's efforts to expand the SCO and BRICS. China wants to turn them into anti-Western blocs. India is unwilling to do that. So could this be retribution? You hurt us in BRICS, we hurt you in the G20. If that is the case, it is petty. This year's G20 was supposed to be about the global south, about issues like climate change and sustainable growth. China is risking all of that for petty politics. And these minor objections could be setting the stage for a bigger one. Xi Jinping skipping the G20 meeting. It's scheduled for September this year, next month. So far, Xi Jinping's travel to India has not been announced. And like it or not, you can't discuss the global south without China. It is home to more than 1.4 billion people. It is the 2nd largest economy in the world. So China's presence is important. They could have used their influence positively to shape the talks. Instead, they're holding the G20 hostage over 2 Sanskrit words. Now, speaking of the G20, one of the events was held in Kashmir, and it has had quite an impact. Officials say it has boosted tourism in Kashmir, so much so that it's poised to break all records. We are only in the month of August, and more than 1.2 crore tourists have visited Kashmir. It is back on the global tourism map. There was a time when the valley was a paradise for visitors. Bollywood films were shot in Kashmir. Foreign tourists flocked in big numbers. But violence and terrorism sponsored by Pakistan drove people away in the last few decades. Our next report tells you about the turnaround.
Tourism in Kashmir is back with a bang. After a few years of turmoil, visitors are flocking to the scenic mountains again. In 2021, over 11 million tourists went to Kashmir. And the upward push continued last year. Now, we don't have official data from 2022 yet, but Kashmir's Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha says almost 19 million tourists went to Kashmir last year. That would make 2022 the best year for tourism in Kashmir so far. And there's good news in store. That number is set to be eclipsed this year. According to officials, Kashmir has seen almost 13 million tourists already this year. And we're barely in August. Kashmir is aiming high. It has set itself a target of more than 20 million tourists by the end of this year. The numbers show that it's well on its way. So, how has the administration pulled this off? Well, it has taken a multidimensional approach. One way is promoting Kashmir tourism aggressively. The government has been setting up stalls across India to encourage visitors. It has been showcasing the beauty of Kashmir and reminding people that militancy has fallen, so Kashmir is safe to visit. While that's an old school tactic, tried and tested, there has been some out-of-the-box thinking as well. One of the new strategies has been expanding the area for tourism. Kashmir's tourism secretary recently announced 300 new spots that will be promoted as tourism destinations. This includes area in the Kashmir Valley and also in the Jammu region. Last weekend, the Lal Draman Hill Station in the Doda region of Jammu saw a 2-day mega tourism festival. Since these places aren't too frequented, different forms of tourism can be promoted. Things like homestays or even adventure tourism. These activities have the government's backing. And of course, nothing showed the Modi government's dedication to Kashmiri tourism like the recent G20 tourism meet. India held this summit in picturesque Srinagar. This is how the delegates were greeted.
You've seen for yourself, and this is an opportunity for you to see with your own eyes what it's all about. Jammu Kashmir has moved on, the common man has moved on.
Every effort was made to show that Kashmir is ready for tourists. When he says moved on, he means from terrorism. Kashmir has borne the brunt of Pakistan's misadventures, which obviously made tourists wary. But it's now turning over a new leaf.
We've had about 18.8 million tourists in 2022, which is the highest ever in the last 3 decades. Highest ever in 2022. 18 million. We expect this number to keep going up in a very big way.
The number of foreign tourists in Kashmir is up to 18,000 already this year, the highest in the last 3 decades. Last year, the number was at about 4,000. So that's a 4.5 time increase. And the year's not even over yet. So the tourism boom, or shall we say bloom, in the Kashmir Valley looks more than just seasonal.
Now to South Korea. The country is hosting the World Scout Jamboree. It is like the world's largest youth camp. This jamboree takes place every 4 years. Scouts from across the world come together. In 2017, South Korea won the bid to host the event. And this is the first in-person Scout Jamboree since the pandemic. So clearly, it's a big deal. 43,000 teenagers from all over the world reached South Korea on the 1st of August. Obviously, they were excited. But what greeted them were overflowing trash bins, dirty toilets, bug-infested fields, and extreme freak weather. It's like the festival was cursed. But just like Gotham sends a signal to Batman when it's in trouble, South Korea sent out an SOS to BTS, the K-pop megastars. They're on a break, but Seoul was in a crisis, so it summoned them. What for? To perform for the Scouts. A South Korean lawmaker called Sung Il-jung proposed this. Because how can dynamite not make everyone's life better? Sung says it is about the power of Korean culture to elevate South Korea's national prestige. But this request has prompted angry responses, mostly from BTS fans online. They're called the BTS Army. And they came down hard on the lawmaker. They said, don't use BTS to cover yourselves up. We'll tell you what they're talking about. South Korea's event has been a complete mess. Like a textbook example of Murphy's Law, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. So this is what happened in a week. First, the Scout Jamboree was crippled by a heat wave. Then there was a looming typhoon, fears of a COVID outbreak, and allegations of misconduct. It's a disaster even BTS cannot undo. It started a week before the Jamboree. There was heavy rainfall around the campsite. Soon it turned into a muddy swamp. The camp became a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Then came a heat wave. Temperatures soared to over 35 degrees Celsius. Hundreds of participants fell ill. 600 scouts had to be treated medically. A makeshift hospital was set up. It catered to heat-stricken scouts.
It's hot in here. I'll be the first to admit it. It is very warm. It's humid. They're doing all kinds of things to help us out. They're putting extra buses online. They're putting ice in our camps for us.
Some even started leaving the campsite, like the UK contingent. They moved to hotels in Seoul just to deal with the heat.
And we wanted them to have a normal Jamboree experience. But of course, from our point of view, it wasn't safe enough for them to do that. In addition to that, of course, the heat is pretty punishing, particularly if you come from the UK. You're not used to this kind of heat.
If the heat wasn't enough, there came a Wuhan virus outbreak. Around 70 people were infected. Then there were allegations of misconduct, poor sanitation, rotten food, lack of privacy. A man from a Thai delegation walked into the female shower facility. The organizers called it an accident, but the delegates were livid, and so were the parents of the scouts.
I'm just in shock of how they could have been so unprepared. Like no tents, no campsites, no basic hygiene facilities. I mean, they knew how many people were coming. They took our money. I really feel like they took our money. Where did this money go? It obviously didn't go to making a jamboree for thousands of scouts from around the world.
So where did the money go? Reports say it went on to fund merry trips for officials. The budget for this Jamboree was $76 million, but local government officials went on a lot of trips. Most of these were overseas trips. The officials described these excursions as research. Turns out it was more leisure and less research. In 2018, 5 officials enjoyed an 8-day trip. They went to the Swiss towns of Lucerne and Interlaken, and then to Italian cities of Milan and Venice. None of these cities have ever held a Scout Jamboree, but the officials were apparently researching. Others even went on cruise ships, both to the United States and Australia. Ironically, the Jamboree does not have a cruise ship component. So how exactly did these visits help? All of these questions are now plaguing South Korea, and before they could even catch a breath, there was Typhoon Khanun. It destroyed whatever was left of the campsite. Contingents pulled out. Thousands were evacuated. The scouts are now in different parts of the country in groups. It has become more of a tourism Jamboree and less of a scout festival.
I don't have control about the weather. I must make the most of it. And that's what scouting teaches us. It teaches us to be resilient, to take things in our stride and handle whatever the situation is. We'll make a plan around it. And that's why I'm part of the Scout movement, because it teaches us these values and morals.
This could be a new lesson for the Scouts. It is definitely a lesson in how not to hold an event. But South Korea says the show must go on. It is powering on with the event. The closing ceremony will have a K-pop concert. Will BTS perform? We don't know. But even if they do, it won't be enough to make South Korea look good after all this chaos. Our next story is about WeWork. But it's not just about one company. It tells you how the changing work culture is impacting businesses and how companies will have to be very agile to adapt and survive in this fast-changing world. Let's tell you about WeWork. It's a company that once wanted to, quote-unquote, elevate the world's consciousness. It was a motto that lacked substance. Perhaps it was a sign. Today, WeWork is struggling to survive. The company is in poor financial shape. The losses are growing. They've released their financials for the second quarter. WeWork has suffered a loss of $397 million. So the company is bleeding money. It is precariously poised. WeWork's management has 12 months to turn things around, else the company could collapse. How did it come to this? On paper, it seemed to have the perfect business model. WeWork runs shared office spaces around the world. As of last year, it was present in more than 700 locations in more than 30 countries. WeWork was started on a simple idea. Just like living in shared accommodation, people would rent an office together. You pay for a space in the same office and share some of the amenities like the coffee machine or the conference room. WeWork runs the facility, it looks after the maintenance, and it earns the rent. Sounds like a good business model, but it's no longer working for WeWork. In a statement, the company lists 3 reasons why: excess supply of real estate, increasing competition, and the larger macroeconomic situation. As costs rise, memberships are going down. The company's stock is taking a beating. On Tuesday, when the numbers came out, the share value fell by 20%. And since the start of 2023, WeWork stock has lost 85% of its value. The management has a turnaround plan. It has 2 parts. First, it wants to reduce rental costs. Right now, many WeWork spaces are leased out by the company. Now they want to renegotiate the leases and reduce the rent. The second part is a bit more tricky. WeWork wants to hold on to its members, but it's proving to be tough. There was a time when every company needed an office. The pandemic changed that. And since then, people have been working differently. Employees want flexibility. Companies want to cut costs, so they adopt hybrid work if they cannot afford an office. It means they're cutting down on office space. Take the case of the US, the country where WeWork is headquartered. The United States of America. A record number of offices in the US are empty. Let me show you numbers from the first 3 months of 2023. Office vacancies touched 20%, meaning 20% of all offices in America were empty. In bigger cities like San Francisco, Dallas, and Houston, this number stood at 25%. Fewer workers were showing up. In America's top 10 business districts, office attendance remained below 50%. Here's another estimate. White-collar workers spent 28% of their time working from home, 28% of their work days at home. So there is plenty of office space, but not enough takers. As of last month, the US had 1 billion square feet of empty offices. 1 billion square feet. If you stack all these offices together and create one tower, it would be over 500,000 feet tall. That's more than 48,000 floors of office space. Imagine that. If you make such a tower of empty office space in Washington or New York, it will be bigger than the Mount Everest. In Washington, D.C. alone, such a structure would have more than 3,600 floors. In New York, more than 3,700 floors. This is the scale of the problem at hand. This is what WeWork is up against. It says this oversupply of office space is hurting its business. They could turn it into an opportunity, renegotiate rentals, get more space. But you see, co-working is not just about having the biggest office. It's also about building a culture. WeWork's biggest sales pitch was its community. The people who signed up for membership. They were promised more than space. They were there for the vibe, for the environment. That's the reason so many startups came on board. They bought into the sales pitch, that the community would feed off each other. So if a startup needed a graphic designer, for instance, they could probably run into one while getting coffee. But now most of these people are working from home, so the old sales pitch is not working, and this is food for thought for companies on how they must keep adapting. India's Chandrayaan-3 is getting closer to the moon. It has entered the lunar orbit, even sent back some pictures of the moon. The landing is scheduled for the 23rd of August, but it looks like Chandrayaan may have a new competitor now, Russia's Luna 25. It is Moscow's first lunar mission in 50 years, and it too wants to land near the South Pole. So it's a race to the moon, and India and Russia are not the only ones. The US and China are also staking claims. Looks like the moon is the hottest piece of cosmic real estate right now. But the big question is, who will win this race? Our next report tells you.
3, 2, 1. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
International tensions can be quite volatile, but countries are taking their feud to a new location. They're racing to stake their claim on the moon. Yes, you heard that right. While some nations are still arguing about borders on Earth, others are extending their territorial ambitions, this time all the way to the moon. The primary suspects are the same as the ones on Earth, the United States and China. America is going back to the moon, but this time to stay. At least that's NASA's plan for now, and they want to do it before China. This is part of America's Artemis project. It wants to send humans to the moon at least by 2030. But why again? Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin have already done it once, and they did it 50 years ago. So why is NASA going back to the moon? The answer could be FOMO, the fear of missing out, or the need to come first in everything. NASA's moon mission may not sound exciting, because why do the same thing again? But they're doing it anyway. That's because China is now focused on the moon. They want to send citizens there. They're planning a lunar base. All of these before 2030. China has its eyes set on the moon, and it's not going down well with Washington. NASA Chief Bill Nelson even mentioned it in a press conference. He said America was in a space race with China and wants to win. Why? Because America is wary. Nelson cited the South China Sea as an example. He said if China could stake its claims there, it could do so on the moon too. NASA wants to assure that resources on the moon are available to all, so it wants to get there first. But it's not just a race between the US and China. Other nations too are part of the space race, like India and Russia.
3, 2, 1, 0.
India launched Chandrayaan-3 on July 14th. It's already released some images of the moon. Chandrayaan-3 is supposed to land on the moon on August 23rd. If successful, India will be the first country to land on the South Pole. It will also be the fourth nation to achieve a lunar soft landing, after the US, the former Soviet Union, and China. But the Chandrayaan now has a new competitor. Moscow is launching its lander on August 11th. This is Russia's first lunar mission since 1976. With this, it plans to return to the moon for the first time in 50 years. The Luna plans to land near the South Pole, and according to the calculated timetable, it may get there around the same time. So, is it a race on who gets there first? Well, Russia says no. It says the two missions will not get into each other's way. That's because they have different landing areas. So, while the space is for everyone, it looks like the race is now heating up. Countries are aiming for the moon, and it's a battle on who gets there first. Who knew that a celestial body could become the stage for such a race for geopolitical dominance? But one thing's for sure, when it comes to reaching for the stars, or the moon here, mankind's penchant for competition knows no bounds.
Cancel culture has claimed many victims, but I'm surprised it hasn't claimed this: beauty pageants. Think about how toxic and absurd they are. What are pageants all about? Rating and ranking women. Yet no one talks about it. The impossible beauty standards, the controversial swimsuit round, the abuse behind the scenes. All of this has been happening for years. The latest incident took place in Indonesia. The Miss Universe Indonesia was held last week. And since then, 6 contestants have filed police complaints. Their charges? Sexual harassment. At least 5 of them were asked to strip down to their undergarments. Apparently, it was a body check. These women were then photographed topless. Around 20 people, including men, were in the room. Some of them were asked to pose inappropriately. They were asked to open their legs for the cameras. Police officers in Jakarta say the investigation is on. Miss Universe organization has also released a statement. They say allegations of sexual abuse are taken extremely seriously. Well, good to know. But this isn't the first such incident. In fact, sexual abuse is common at beauty pageants. So what has Miss Universe done to stop it? Very little. Most of these pageants are still organized by men, not just the big bosses, but even people who look after the day-to-day stuff. So it's a hunting ground for predators. I have some examples for you. In 2017, the CEO of Miss America was suspended. He sent sexist and crude messages about former participants. In 2018, one of the sponsors at Miss Earth was called out by 3 contestants. They accused him of sexual harassment. In 2022, the organizer of Miss Rwanda was arrested again for sexual abuse. Now, if you notice, these are all recent cases. All of them happened within the last 6 years, but that does not mean abuse is also recent. It's been a constant feature of beauty pageants. The only difference is this: women are finally speaking out. One such revelation came out in 2016. A Miss USA contestant accused Donald Trump. He apparently barged into the room when the contestants were naked. This was back in 2001. Donald Trump used to own Miss Universe back then. Why do these incidents keep happening? And more importantly, how do we stop them? Simple answer: stop them all. Beauty pageants are toxic, abusive, and outdated. They have no place in our society. These contests are designed for the male gaze. Some of them have Stone Age conditions, like Miss France. In 2021, activists filed a complaint against the competition. They said it was discriminatory. Contestants had to be 5.5 feet tall. They had to be single and childless. In what world does this qualify as beauty? A lot of people say these contests give women self-confidence and opportunities, a launchpad for their careers. But looking at the track record, we disagree. Pageants do not give self-confidence. They give body dysmorphia and eating disorders. Let me tell you what a study found in 2003. They surveyed 130 beauty queens, 130 beauty queens. Most of them had either won contests or had been finalists. 26% of them had an eating disorder, and that too by age 16. 48% of them wanted to be even thinner, and 57% were trying to lose weight. Remember, these were beauty pageant finalists. Despite that, around half of them were not satisfied with the way they looked. They wanted to be thinner. And the impact on the audience is equally bad. Imagine young girls watching and learning from these beauty pageants. They could also develop body dysmorphia. So let's recap what is wrong with beauty pageants. The contestants repeatedly get harassed. Most of them have low self-esteem, and the audience buys into this toxic standard of beauty. It makes you wonder, why do we still have them? Because there's money to be made. The beauty pageant industry is worth $5 billion. Most contests are sponsored by cosmetic companies. That's another $300 billion. These groups benefit from pageants. They don't see women with body dysmorphia. They see a potential customer. Just look at the Miss Universe winners since the year 2000. Only 6 of them, only 6 since the year 2000, were from so-called first world countries. The rest came from the developing world, and do not mistake this for a diversity push. It was all about expanding to new markets, about selling the pageant dream to more people. But how do we get rid of them? One option is to make a generational change, to teach young girls what body positivity is, how pageants distort the idea of beauty and looks. Unless we do that, it's hard to end them. Before we begin the next story, I must tell you this. It is not a Hollywood film or a Netflix series, but it could be either. It has royal intrigue and the return of an estranged prince. No, he is not called Harry, though the similarities are uncanny. Tonight we are talking about drama in the Thai royal family. The second oldest son of the king has made a surprise visit home. He has come home after 27 years. He was stripped of all his titles when he was still a teenager, and since then he's been living in the US. So why has he returned now? The Thai royal family is going through a tough phase. The heir apparent is in a coma. There are doubts about the line of succession, and by happy coincidence, this exiled prince returns. Will this kick off a new Game of Thrones in Thailand? Here's a report.
You would think that today palace politics would be a thing of the past. In most countries, the monarchy has either been abolished or at least severely limited, so succession crises aren't what they used to be. Well, that isn't the case in Thailand, where the exiled prince Vachareson Vivacharewongse has made a surprising return. He put out a picture of himself getting out of one of Bangkok's famed tuk-tuks and created a storm of gossip. We'll get to why this is making headlines in a moment. To understand the importance of this situation, we need to understand Thailand's politics. The government is technically a constitutional monarchy, but the Thai version is a bit more hands-on. Thai monarchs have an outsized say in politics. They have traditionally been close to the Thai military. Military leaders have launched coups and claimed the support of the royal family. And in turn, various Thai juntas have protected the royal family's standing. They are protected from criticism because of strict lèse majesté laws. People can be thrown into jail for up to 15 years for criticizing the royal family. So you can see why the royal family still holds a lot of sway in the country. That's why it's important for the Thai people to know who the next monarch will be. And that's been up in the air for a few months. This is the King of Thailand, Maha Vajiralongkorn. He also goes by the regal name Rama X. He just turned 71 a few days ago. So it's fair to wonder about his successor. The king has lived a colourful life, to put it mildly. He's been married 4 times and has 7 children, 2 daughters and 5 sons. But only 3 of the children are officially recognized, his daughters and his youngest son. The 4 eldest princes were stripped of their titles in the mid-1990s. This is when the king divorced their mother. He accused her of infidelity. Never mind that all 4 of the princes and their sister were born out of wedlock. But nonetheless, he divorced their mother and went to marry twice more. He had a son with his 3rd wife. But the youngest prince reportedly has a learning disability, so he may not be able to take the throne. So this left the princesses as potential successors. The eldest daughter, Princess Bajrakitayabha, was expected to take power, either as the outright heir or as a regent. She was seen as a worthy successor. But then tragedy struck last December. The Thai royal palace announced she had experienced a severe heart arrhythmia. The princess has reportedly been in a coma ever since. Thailand's succession plans went up in smoke. No one was sure about who would succeed the colourful Rama X. But then this week, an exiled prince came home. Vajiralongkorn is the king's 2nd son. He's 42 years old. He spent 27 of those years in the United States. He now works there as a lawyer. The prince has always been pro-monarchy, which isn't really a surprise. The surprise is his visit. He came to the capital Bangkok on Sunday. The next day, he went to an important temple where he paid his respects to the country's supreme Buddhist patriarch. He then went to a childcare center for underprivileged families, which happens to be supported by the royal family.
I am delighted to return to Thailand. I have been warmly welcomed. I have been away for a long time, 27 years. It is like a dream come true to be back here. Before the plane could land, I looked outside the window. I felt very emotional and grateful to the country. I have never forgotten that I am Thai. I have never forgotten about the importance of Thai culture.
Does that sound like an election pitch to you? The prince may have a lot more to do before he can claim the throne. The Thai royal family have made no mention of his visit. They haven't even acknowledged it. The prince hasn't said anything about the looming succession crisis either. But his visits to the temple and the childcare home look suspiciously like royal ceremonial visits. Could this be an audition for the royal role? We'll keep you posted.
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Starting with Turkey, a strong gust of wind took a man away with it. In the US, a giant tornado swept through the state of Colorado. Meanwhile, practicing yoga is good for your mind and your body. Having pets can brighten your dull day. Some yoga enthusiasts in New Delhi, in India, have mixed the two, creating a perfect way to unwind and de-stress. And finally, what makes August the 9th significant? On this day in 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Nagasaki. The bomb was codenamed Fat Man. About 40,000 people were killed immediately. This led to Japan's unconditional surrender in the Second World War. That'll be all for now. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
You're welcome.